Hi everyone, my name's Janelsa, or Jay. I'm from the Post House Church in Salisbury, Brisbane, and I've come here today to share with you my top 10 tips for videography and photography. So a little bit about myself. I did a Bachelor of Journalism where I majored in public relations and photography. So like the whole essence behind that is how to tell a story essentially through your words and your videos and your photos. And so I've really leaned more and more into the photography part over the past decade, and yeah, it's something I'm passionate about, something I feel called to do for a really, really, really long time. And it's something that I fall in love with every single time I'm behind the camera. So today, essentially, I'm going to explain to you my best tips for getting started. I know it's kind of scary, or even if you're already started, like how to build proper storytelling and just making sure that you've got your basics covered. I've only, like I've said, I've kind of been doing this for almost 10 years now. I bought my first camera in 2013. I shot my first photo, I was over in Kuala Lumpur, and I was in I've forgotten what the Twin Towers, and you have the looking bridge, and I took this bird's eye view, and I was like, what? I took that photo, and ever since then I've been in love with photography, and I've been pursuing it ever since. My gift and my love and my passion for photography and videography has brought me face to face with so many world leaders, either at a G20, I've met and interviewed various people, Franklin Graham. I've worked for our Prime Minister, the Prime Minister of Australia. So your gift, as the Bible says, does make room for you to pursue and see some of your goals and things that you've always desired. And one of the ways I've done it is just making sure that I always take or bring my best self to each event that I'm shooting, or each wherever I am. I try to apply my tools the best way I can, and through that, God has just constantly opened doors. I pray before every shoot, every video, every outreach, God, just help me get the shots, because if we use our tools right, revival really can happen on the backs of what we create, thanks to God. So without further ado, let's go into my first top 5 tips for photography. Feel free to take some notes, write them down, because we're going to just take kind of a deep dive a little bit into these top 5 tips. So let's get on with it. Tip number 1. My number 1 tip is to, even before you pick up a camera, is to prepare. Just go into a shoot thinking, okay, it's outreach. I want to get, let's say Easter parade. I love shooting Easter because it's so intense, so emotional. People are there's an act going on usually with our church when we're doing the parades. There's people watching, kind of being like, oh my gosh, people are yelling and crying and carrying on. Whoa, what are we doing? So you're going to shoot the Easter parade. All right, what shots are we looking for? Why are we shooting? And what end result do you see in your mind? What shots do you want to be like, oh wow, okay, that kind of tells the story of why we're there. Okay, so get an idea in your head. If necessary, I always carry a pad and pen in my bag. Write them down, just get an idea, write them down in your notebook, and rip off that page and take it with you. Make my second part B, make sure all your gear is charged. I cannot tell you the amount of times where especially when I first started, I forgot to charge the camera, and I've got 3 bars left, and I have a 3-hour shoot. Nothing was going to happen. So make sure your gear is charged, your gimbal is charged, your mics are charged, everything, and you've got backups, memory cards, backup batteries, backup everything. There's a saying in the photography videography, I can't even say it, videography There is a saying in the creative world, let's just do that. 1 is none and 2 is 1. So basically, it's the pros have 2 of everything. So if you can, I know you can't have 2 iPhones or whatever, but have 2 of everything that you know you need to run a successful shoot. Make sure you know what you're wearing. Personally, I wear a lot of black purely because black absorbs light. It doesn't reflect it. So if you're wearing something bright pink or bright green, you might see that show up in your images as the light hits it and casts off a shadow or a tone. So most creatives wear black. Wear flat shoes, sneakers if you can, or low heels if it's like revival, and everything. Make sure it's decent. Also know where you're shooting. That makes a lot of difference. So the night before, just make sure you got all this hashed out, prepare. Also, if it's like an outreach, carry water, carry snacks, because you're going to get hungry. You're using like 3 times much more energy as everyone else because the gear that you're carrying actually is quite heavy. It can be quite heavy, or just quite taxing on your body. So if you're holding out a gimbal or carrying a camera, you're constantly using that one position and your muscles do get sore and whatever. So yeah. So sorry, that's just my neighbor. Yeah, so that's just prepare. Just be on the market, be on the money, just know what you need and make sure it's all there. Make sure it's working properly. Make sure you're try out your memory cards. Make sure if you're using an older memory card that it's uncorrupted, it still works fine. Take a couple of tester shots, delete them, you're good. Speaking of it, memory cards, make sure they're all empty before you shoot. I have a nasty habit of not emptying my memory cards, but yeah, you should empty your memory card so you have a clean shoot. That way, even if you do delete something, you won't be like, oh, that was from another shoot and I shouldn't have deleted that. If you do happen to have a previous shoot on your memory card and you can't empty it or whatever, what I'd like to do is lock that last image that you took on the previous shoot. That means that it's locked in there. You can't delete it unless you or accidentally delete it unless you make the conscientious choice to delete it. All right, moving on to point number 2, storytelling. Yay. So storytelling, every story has a start, middle, and ending. So if you think as photography or videography in the start, middle, and ending, what are you saying? What is, where did it start? Where did this journey start? Where's the climax? Kind of where's the middle part? Where's the point of conflict? And how did you resolve it? How does it end? So these are kind of the essences of the essence of storytelling that you want to say, but without words. You want to say, which is visually. So like I said in the beginning, take a notebook, take a shot list, get a shot list of the shots that you want to see happen, that you want to get. Go out and get them. Go out there and just be like, okay, let's get this shot, let's get that shot, because I believe those 3 things tell a story. Angles. Everyone says, oh, you're taking a selfie, don't take it straight on, get the angles. It's true, because angles can change people like that, change subjects from looking like really small and insignificant to you got that low angle, you got the hero shot, and so suddenly they're like the champion of the story. They know what's up, they know what's good. So make sure you get those angles, you get various angles, get your bird's eye wide shot is a really great way just to get a different angle that gets people curious, because you're like, oh, what am I looking at? And so they kind of really have to look at. It's what we call a scroll stopper. It stops people mid-scroll on their Instagram feeds and you're like, oh wow, that's a good shot. So if you can nail a bird's eye on you, because not many people do that. So look up. A lot of people forget when they're in these places. Sometimes you have to get low and look up. So don't hesitate to bob down, to squat even, and look up and see what you can kind of get. Once again, a scroll stopping shot if you can nail a look up shot. Don't be afraid to get close. Some people, your subjects, especially working with church folk, they can be camera shy. They're like, oh, I don't look pretty. I have a philosophy and I live by it, and I've learnt to love myself through this philosophy, is that everyone is uniquely beautiful. You don't have to, look like you're on the cover of a glossy magazine. You just have to be and present yourself as God made you, because you're fearfully and wonderfully made. And once people understand the uniqueness of who they are, they just radiate their God-given potential glow, and suddenly they want to be on camera. And so if you can effectively communicate to people, especially before you start shooting, if you can effectively communicate to people, especially before you start shooting, that you don't have to, pose. You don't have to, I just want to capture you authentically in the moment. It's a beautiful thing. People will surprise you. So don't be afraid to get up close. Okay, this is about lighting. I don't have a lot of time, but know your light, know where your light is. Right now, I've got my bedroom lamp right here, and it's lighting me up. So without it, I'm a little bit flat. Got my laptop light, and it's kind of distracting in my glasses, but I'll pop that on. It kind of balances out. It's not perfect, but it gives me, it separates me from my background video wise, but also it adds takes away shadows, adds shadows, and what have you. So make sure you know your lighting, use it well, especially out in natural light. With clouds, when you have clouds in the sky, it's the perfect time to shoot. We call it God's softbox, where it's just a nice diffused, non-harsh light that can really, emulate people's colors, skin tones, saturated colors from nature. So know your lighting and you know how to use it well. Is my biggest thing. Try not to shoot in direct sunlight, otherwise, like my glasses here, you'll have really nasty shadows and what have you. So try and not to shoot in direct sunlight unless you know how you want it to look, or if that's the look that you're kind of going for. Framing is so important. So with framing, you've got your horizontal line, so your horizon, and your vertical line, so walls and posts and what have you. So if you can frame someone really well, and using the rule, no doubt you've heard the rule of thirds, which are awesome, but if you can frame someone really well, you have just nailed almost a photo within a photo kind of thing. So just make sure you know how to use your rule of thirds. No one's kind of like a little bit wonky, just slightly off this, or slightly off this. Make sure if you're going to have someone dead on center, make sure they're dead on center. If you're going to have them on in a third like this, make sure they're dead on third, but make sure your framing also serves a purpose. So if you've got something in the background, right now you can see my hat on the wall and my gym gear on the basket in the background here, make sure it has a purpose. So you might want to have some more dynamic range, want to show more of the background or whatever, but make sure that whatever your framing is has a purpose, has a point, so that way you can kind of tell a story as well, because sometimes just having this also the same framing is that's someone dead on center, kind of sucks. So make sure you can get creative, but also don't forget the rules. So that's why framing is important. And actually, framing also can be separated into three kind of tiers. You got your foreground. So your foreground is kind of my hands right here. I'm in the midground, and my back wall is a background. All right, so that's 3 levels in one image. So you want to make sure that you also use those for your purposes. So if you're shooting outside, you might use a tree branch as your foreground, your subject in the midground, and the background as the location. Or if you're shooting a revival, a nice breaker upper is to shoot in between people. To shoot, so it says that people are there, but your subject might be in the middle of the photo, and there's two people on either side of the photo that are not quite in it, but they're in your foreground, and then or your background might be the preacher, you know, giving them a word or something. I've got classic shots that you might have seen on the Potter's House Salisbury's Instagram page, where I've used that tactic just to show that, hey, there's actual people here. Because sometimes we get too lost in the fact that, hey, there's a preacher, he's preaching revival, and all you get is preacher behind the podium and it's kind of blank. Or the preacher on the side, and you got the side shot of the preacher, and then on the other far side is the wall. You want to do the best you can to capture people within your photograph, so it just doesn't look like someone's preaching to dead air. It doesn't look like you're just, you know, marching around, like one person marching around in dead air. The more people you can get in the photo, the better, you know, just to make it as real and honest and true to how it was in that moment you took it as well. Which also brings me to another point. What you exclude is equally as important as what you include, so make sure you know the difference between the two, and make proper judgments of what you want to use and what you don't want to use. All right, so make sure also when you're following these rules, they're not distractive. You don't get too much of someone's, you know, ear or shoulder in the foreground or the background, and it's distractive. Or if like someone's distracted in the shot in the background, you might not use that shot because it might deter away from the main point and focus of the image. Yeah, so make sure like all that is running through your mind as you're taking the story. Taking the photo on this in the field. My third point would be know your gear. Know your gear. This is super important. I shoot with a Nikon D7000. It's a crop lens camera. It's not full frame. So I know that. So I know my camera does have limitations. So know what you're using. But the rule is for all photography and videography is the best camera you have is the one you have on you. Most of us have an iPhone in our back pocket. If you know how to whip out that phone and get that shot, you know, utilize lighting, manage the exposure in the camera, you know, you're gonna get like a decent shot. It's just knowing how to use it. You just can't be like, oh, okay, I got my vertical shot, blah blah blah. Try to get landscape shots. Try to shoot landscape as much as possible. Because most people watch videos in landscape, or televisions are done in landscape. They're not done in portrait mode. That's another thing. That's just another point. But yeah, so set up your camera. If you're using a DSLR, set up your camera to shoot RAW. RAW just means that all the colors are uncompressed. It's as close as technologically possible to how your eye sees and translate colors. Make sure your settings are correct. Like I shoot in manual, so I don't use auto mode. I don't use like the camera's flash, because like the settings change really like on their own. It automatically changes to what the camera thinks it's best, and oftentimes 9 times out of 10 that's wrong, misses the subject, and then you've got like a really bad image. So shoot manual, learn how to shoot manual. That way, like, you have more control over the image you want to capture, and also you have more control to change things if they're incorrect. This helps a lot when it comes to editing in Photoshop and Lightroom. I have a saying that was ingrained into me when I was interning with some photojournalists. If you want to shoot it right before you go to Photoshop. Say, don't ever say, oh, we'll fix it in Photoshop later. That doesn't cut it in photography. That's not real photography. You shoot it right, and if you need to fix it, you can fix it in Lightroom later, like the lighting or the shadows, or small things. But make sure you shoot it right. You just can't take an awful photo and then do taxing hours in Photoshop and Lightroom because you didn't shoot it properly. Take the time to pause, make sure your settings are right, and get it as right as you can, and then you'll be like, you know what, if it needs to be straightened out a little bit, we can straighten it out. If we need to crop it in like a tad bit, we can crop it in. But just don't rely on Photoshop to solve all your problems, because it's going to waste not only your time and energy, but it just doesn't make you an efficient photographer. Another reason why we shoot manual, especially if you're outside, I gave the example before of when you're at the Easter parade. A lot of this time you're moving, you're running around, you're in changing light, so you might have to increase or decrease your shutter speed. You might have to go from single click to continuous clicking on your when you're taking a photo, because you know there's like someone street preaching, they've got the hands going, you got the motions, and you don't want to miss it. So I can't remember how many frames my camera takes per second. I think it's like 7 frames per second. It's like that's quite slow. That's quite for a camera, to say that is a camera in 2020, that's quite slow compared to, you know, the $5,000 cameras we got out there. Obviously, I'm not a money tree, so I don't have, you know, a $10,000 camera, but at that pro level. But you have to use what you've got and know it really well to get those pro shots. So you can be using an iPhone and still take a banger shot. So you don't have to worry about, you know, oh, I don't have a 10 grand camera, I don't have a 10K camera, so I'm not going to go shoot. No, it's more like, I might not have a 10K camera, but I'm going to see what shots I can get, and I can work with that. So working with also within your limitations really is quite liberating. You don't have to, you know, compare yourself to other people. Technically speaking, learn to know what, where, and when you need to change your ISO, your shutter speed, and your f-stop. So these are all things that control, like manually you can control. They change your picture from having like a really nice bokeh blurred out background to being really sharp, really everything evenly exposed. Or you can have like a really you know, a slow shutter speed, and you know, there can be movement in your image that it turns into a blur if someone's walking past but your subject's still. All these aspects help create a photo, help tell the story of what's happening. So know how to use them, when to use them, why you're using them. If you know why you're using them, you can apply them to just take those shots that just stand out, that tell a story within a few seconds of your audience's eyes seeing them. White balance. Now, you might not have heard this term before, but basically white balance is kind of like this. So my wall there is really, really white, and because there's a little bit of sunlight hitting it. But if I opened up my blinds, it kind of changes the white balance. And so you might have to like balance out what sort of light you're having. So my camera right now is situated to me having my lamp on, my shutters shut, and it's balanced for this light. Once again, in changing conditions, let's go back to the Easter Day parade. You're most probably moving in the city. You're going to be going between buildings, so you're going to have to know your white balance. I personally don't change my white balance as many people do, but if you do have to tweak it, just tweak it down or tweak it up just a little bit. I personally just keep it on auto. My camera is pretty good at sensing when and what's white balance it needs to be at. If you need to change it, it's quite an easy change in Photoshop or Lightroom, but just go ahead and change it, it'll be fine. But if you need to do a test shot, get a white piece of paper out or white ball, test it out and see if it's good enough, and making sure that your exposure meter, like every camera has an exposure meter down the bottom, it will have a plus or a negative or and everything like that, and a 0 in the middle. If it's over to the plus side, it means your image is going to be overexposed. If it's over to the 0 side, it means your image is going to be underexposed. So for me personally, I like to have and they'll have like a meter telling you where your image sits, or like a little triangle telling you where if you take a shot where it how it's going to look exposure wise. So personally, I like to keep my exposure between the 0, so perfectly balanced, everything's beautifully exposed between the 0 and towards the negative when I'm outdoors. That way you can get like a nice kind of nice shadow, juicy colors, but it's not always overexposed. If you overexpose an underexposed image, as long as it's not too extreme, you can 9 times out of 10 fix it in Lightroom. You don't want to have, I did mention the phrase ISO before. So basically the ISO just controls your camera's sensor sensitivity to light. So basically what that means, it will dictate how much light it will allow on the sensor to create that image. And so if you have a higher ISO, kind of like how my guitar is right now, it's a little bit grainy. That means that my camera is particularly not sensitive to the light there because there's not much there, whereas my face is nice and evenly exposed, and it's slightly less grainy. So it kind of controls how much pixels is allocated to that section, I guess, of how much pixels are allocated to that section, so we can get the best cultivated image. I personally don't like to shoot in a high ISO unless I'm in a low light setting, and that way we can that way it can get the best exposed image. So make sure your ISO is at a decent, when you're outside, if it's like straight sunlight, you want to have an ISO of 100 and a shutter speed of 1/20th of a second. So 120 is actually quite low. So you might even want to boost it up to quite high. So you just change, depending on where you are outside, you can change your shutter speed. If you want to keep the ISO the same, you can change your shutter speed. So that basically dictates how fast or how fast your shutter opens and closes. And that means how much light it's letting in that microsecond to get the best image. All right, so know your gear is quite in depth. I hope you guys are keeping up with these notes. So basically, if you can get your settings right and shoot it right the first time, going into Photoshop and Lightroom should be a breeze. Don't ever shoot in auto, because it changes all those ISO, f-stop, all those settings with each shot you take. So when you're shooting, I like to shoot in manual. So when it goes into editing, if you just want to do like what we call a preset, have a preset settings of edits, like you can change the colors or whatever to apply to all of your images, and then do slight tweaks on them. That's how you get a whole bunch of images kind of looking similarly edited, or someone has a similar style, is because they use a preset and they shoot in manual or close to it. If you're using an iPhone to take photos, I would recommend, I use an iPhone X. I wouldn't go below an iPhone 7 Plus or more, just so that, because it has that dynamic range, it has elements of dynamic range to it. It has that selective focus, and it just has the sort of pixels you've come to expect when you're on Instagram or on YouTube or whatever. It has the capabilities of shooting at in HD or at a 1080p. We'll get more into that when we're talking about videography. All right, and if you're shooting on an iPhone, always shoot in live mode. That way you can, when you go to edit, even in the iPhone, you can change, if you swipe up on any live image you take, you can change it to be have different sort of effects. I use it for my long exposure iPhone photography all the time. All right, so point number 4 is just a general experience of shooting photography. My advice for you, especially if you're new or you just want to start up this ministry in your church, just get out there and do it. Photography is all about learning. It's always about improving with every shot you take, and so that every shot you do take is better than your last. So just go out there, learn as much as you can. So I did mention before, editing, why. So if you shoot a manual, it's so much easier when you go back into Lightroom and Photoshop. So you can just apply a preset, and it's quite similar to your style. So not every shot's different. Personally, like a lot of the places I've been into, I know I was a little bit rebellious or whatever, but a lot of places I've been into, I don't ask permission. I shoot. And so if someone's like, oh, you can't take that, okay, delete the photo. So, especially when you're outreaching, you have to be kind of like, not a maverick, but you have to be, just kind of, not dogmatic. I can't think of the right word, but you just have to be on it. You have to, okay, I want to get the shot. I'm just going to do whatever I can to get the shot legally. All right. There have been events where I have snuck into certain places where I shouldn't have got the shot. No one's really batted an eye, but I did what I had to do to get a shot that I had to take. Yeah, and most times, 9 times out of 10, it's worth it. Sometimes it's not. Climbing up to roofs is not worth it unless you've gotten permission before. I've done that, and I didn't get caught, but I could have got caught, and it would have been very bad for me. So don't ask permission, beg forgiveness, whatever. But yeah, just if you do what it takes to get the shot. I know when to take a break and walk away. So a lot of us do, when I do edits, when I shoot a wedding or whatever, you know, it's really easy to shoot, come home, dump it onto the computer, start editing, do an edit. I do a thing called same day turnaround sometimes, if like I'm shooting a revival or someone needs an edit, or I've just loaned my services out to another church. I do a same day turnaround where I shoot an edit on the same day and I send it off. That can be great if you know what you're going to get. But I do recommend between shooting and editing, you take a break after you finish your first lot of edits. It's kind of like your first draft, and you come back to it and be like, okay, I absolutely hate this edit. We're going to do it again, or I really love this edit. We can make some tweaks here. Just approach it with fresh eyes is my biggest recommendation. Anticipate. I've shot so many revivals. I've shot so many preachers. I know how certain preachers move. I know how certain preachers act. I know when, you know, certain preachers like to come off the stage and go right up into people's faces. So I anticipate that. Certain preachers are more reserved and they stay behind the podium and take 2 steps to the left and 2 steps to the right every 5 minutes. You know, it's just a lot of it just comes down to anticipating their moves and observing. I've observed my dad preach like countless minutes of my dad preaching. So I know when he's going to do the big hands that's going to, you know, get the shot. I know when he's going to just stay behind the podium. I know when he's reading a scripture that he doesn't move. He's like reading the scripture. So that's the shot that I'm going to get, him looking down. And I don't want that shot. So I want to get the shots where he is passionate, he's going for it, and he's using his hands as some sort of element. That's really good, especially when you can't get people in the frame. So if your preacher or whoever's your subject is able to use some, not unusual, but not your usual sort of hand gestures, it tells a story as well. So yeah, just not just getting someone just standing there looking weird. When you're shooting, know your surroundings. I can't tell you how many times I've always been hit by a bus, you know, almost tripped over, walked into a post because I didn't look around. So as you're shooting, good photographers, good videographers, don't have one eye closed. That's pretty amateurish. Learn how to shoot with both eyes open. It takes a bit of getting used to, but you do get used to it. And I get a thing called, I personally call it lens eye, when you're shooting with one eye and the other eye is like kind of low-key focused on what's happening outside the camera, and this eye kind of has to adjust to, you know, readjust all the time. That's dangerous. Protect your eyes. I wear blue screens now just because I'm always in front of a computer 9 times out of 10 for the majority of my day. But also knowing when to reset yourself, when to walk away, just take a walk outside, because this line of work can be very taxing on your physical body. And just in general, I know when I started out, people I was subject to a lot of people's opinions. People will always have an opinion, and sometimes always a level of criticism, especially those people who don't like being on camera. Just know how to choose your critics wisely and know when to listen. Do they have enough experience to back them up? And I'm not just saying dismiss them, but take it on, because some of my best critics and some of my best improvements to my work have come from people who are not necessarily in my field, but know what they want. Yeah. And I strongly believe, like, I don't do posed photos, especially on outreach. It's all about the authenticity of the moment for me. So, you know, I try not to over edit. I try not to do posed photos, just because that's not authentic. It's not what happened. So, and that's not how you are all the time. So let's just not do it. You know? Okay, point number 5 in photography before we move on to videography is editing and workflow. After every shoot, dump all your raw images onto a hard drive and then back it up onto the cloud if you can. With filing, I usually name my files with the location and subject and date. So recently I was over in northern New South Wales in Lismore with Evangelist Ben Reddy. So I put Lismore, Ben Reddy, and the date. So yeah, so it's simple, it's easy to find, and so if you need to do a quick keyword search and stuff, not going through thousands of files, you just know exactly. And so yeah, so that's really easy, just a quick filing system, and then you dump all your files in there, and then you upload them to Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop. You've done your editing, you export them. You can export them, I put them in the same file, but I make another folder within that file called edited, and that has all of my edited images in there. Make sure each and every image that you want to use is straightened automatically. Lightroom has an awesome tool that straightens all your photos. 9 times out of 10 it's right on the money, so make sure that's done as well, because there's nothing worse than scrolling through Instagram and you see like a photo that's kind of crooked. So just make sure you just have a thoroughness of mind and spirit when it comes to that sort of thing. That your images, also make sure your images are decently exposed and not over edited. I sometimes do, like looking back through my photos, have a nasty habit of over editing my images. That dates them really quickly, so like it might be on trend to do that sort of edit then, but also you have to also look in the long term of things. Is that image going to be pretty dated? And 9 times out of 10 it is. So like I like to use a certain preset, and I've been using like a certain preset for years and years now, so all of our images low-key look alike, because I don't know about like a lot of your churches, but we've got a lot of tan and dark skinned people in our church, so like certain presets look amazing with their skin tone, whereas other preset settings don't look great. Like the presets are almost like filters, so they don't look great. So I usually start to one preset, but I'm trying to also make improvements where I can use that preset and it looks good on dark skinned people and light skinned people, because all of our preachers are white, and that preset might not necessarily look good on them. So you can do a mass application when you're in Lightroom or in Photoshop to a particular preset. To a mass application of a preset to all your images, but you might have to go back through each image and make sure it's tweaked correctly, make sure it's just adjusted right, instead of just doing a mass preset application and then exporting them, because you can have some horrible looking pictures. You'll have horrible, like that's really lazy, and don't ever do that. Go through each and every image. In saying that though, when you are making your selection of images, which is what we call culling, pick the images. They might not look amazing before you edit them, but give them a shot. Make sure you give them like a proper shot in the edit process and then get rid of them. But if you know it's a bad shot, don't even bother importing it into Lightroom. You need to save space, and you need to make the most of your time. So just make sure you're editing. Don't over edit, don't under edit, because you don't want the story of that particular image to get lost. Alright, so guys, we're done with video photography. Let's move on to videography. Yay. Alright, so videography, videos, the art of video making. Audio. Audio is what makes videos, in my personal opinion. You can watch, Jaws, and if it had classical music at the point where the shark's about to bite that person's leg or whatever happens in Jaws, I've never seen it, but we all know it's got that big mechanical shark called Bruce, and it's scary. But if it had ring a rosy, a pocket full of toesies, tissues, it wouldn't be scary. It wouldn't have that scary factor. It would be like a child's lullaby. It'd be like, what are we watching? And that's not scary. Ha ha ha. This is boring. But when it has that haunting strings and dun 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 dun, and the big crescendo, everything like that, you're like, oh my gosh, this is scary. And then suddenly you're winning awards. Same principle applies. Your audio matters, whether it's dialogue, whether it's background music. It has to match, it has to be in sync, and it has to be just well done. So making sure it all matches up. If you're at a concert scene and you've got you're showcasing summarizing the end of a concert, and you're like, oh guys, last week Saturday, this is what happened. You can still audio from that day, but at the end of the day, at the end of it all, when you're making this video, you want to have some hype music in the background. You want to have, your rap, your Lecrae or whatever, or just some hype music that you've bought as well. That being said, you're going to have to invest some money into this practice. You can't always just be ripping off music for free or off YouTube, because you'll get slapped with copyright from Instagram or YouTube, and therefore no one will be able to see your video. So all that time and effort would be pointless. So make sure you go about the legal ways of getting videos or stock footage. When you are doing your audio, use a mounted mic. I've got Rode mics. So right now we are live streaming via Instagram, just because we can't get live streaming anywhere else right now. So we're right now, just because of the whole COVID thing, we're using Instagram live every Sunday morning. I mic my dad up with these. So this is the receiver, this is the transmitter. I might have it wrong. One of them is a microphone, one of them's the receiver. So this guy plugs into my iPhone, so that's the iPhone jack, that's cord, and it's wireless, so it works via Bluetooth. I fire this bad boy up right here, so it's on right now, and it's looking for this guy right here. And then as you might see, it might check 1 2, might check 1 2. Very simple, very quick, very easy setup. And yeah, just make sure that when you're doing your audio and editing and stuff, that everything's leveled. You can double check the levels. It will show you I use Adobe Premiere, whatever software you're doing, it will show you your audio levels as well. So that brings me back to my next point. Point number 2 in videography is your gear. I'm not fussed about what camera you use. Personally, I'm quite new to videography. Didn't start out liking it, but then it's actually necessary. If you're a photographer, you need to know how to take videos as well. There's no excuse these days, because 80%, if not 90% of what we consume right now is in video format. So it's a lot of people don't even watch the news unless there is or read the news online unless there's a video or photo component to it. That's really good. I know that for a fact. Newsrooms won't run a story, even if it's a good story, if it doesn't have a decent photo. So make sure your photos are good. Make sure they're really good. So personally, I use my iPhone. I have an iPhone X. Right now I'm filming with my front forward facing camera, so my selfie cam. and it's all right. It gets the job done on the front cam. The back cam does obviously a way better job because that's where the money is. I just whack that in a gimbal so it's stable. I chuck my microphones on there when I'm filming like a piece to camera, so like I'm doing an interview or something, and I place this graciously on this, literally it's got a clip either on the subject, so this is the right one, so I clip it on the subject like this, making sure the microphone is facing towards their mouth as close as possible, because that's what you want to capture. You don't want it to the side or anything like that, because that's what you're going to get. And it's further away from like earrings and stuff. Most probably you can hear my earrings knocking against my AirPods right now because they're right there, and it's actually really annoying, so I'm just going to take it off. So there's that. And so you can clip it onto your subject, or sometimes if you're like just doing like getting some B-roll, you don't have to have a microphone on so for me, because this is usually hooked up, like I literally have blue tack and I stick it to the side of my gimbal, so like the transmitter's not lost and it doesn't take too much of a toll on my camera when it's in the gimbal. I usually don't shoot B-roll with a microphone in, just because it's not necessarily, it's B-roll. We'll go over B-roll later. Alright, so when I say I'm not fussed about what camera or gear you use, I mean like I don't shoot with something that doesn't shoot anything over 720 pixels or 720p. So that's basically the quality of pixelation you're going to get in your image as you shoot. So make sure you've got, like, I won't go below an iPhone 7 Plus when you're shooting. Make sure you get that, because what we call in the news world, it's what we call broadcast quality. If you're shooting off some shonky, Samsung Galaxy S4, that's not going to cut it. You need to have like something that's at least not, maybe 4 years old or younger. Technology ages in dog years, if not faster. So, earlier this year my gimbal was great. Now there's a newer model. I've had this gimbal that I've got right here for less than a year, and there's already a newer model out. So it just ages, technology ages really fast, so you have to be on the money. So I'm not saying go out and spend 10 grand, blow your church's budget, blow your personal budget, but I'm just saying use the tools that you have, but make sure that they're able to do the job. If not, find someone that does have the tools. I mentioned my gimbal before. I use a gimbal, especially when I'm on the field, because often 9 times out of 10, I'm shooting as well as doing the videography, and I don't have time to, just kiss fight around and trying to figure out how to get like a stable video. So I'll bring my gimbal along. I whack my camera, my phone in my gimbal and start shooting. And with cameras like the iPhone, the basic settings, I believe, are 1080p at 24 frames per second. I personally believe that you should be shooting at 1080p 60 frames per second as a minimum. That way, if you want to slow down some B-roll, it is nice and smooth, instead of like looking like CCTV footage where you feel like frames are missing. So 60 frames per second basically means how many images are in that 1 second to make up that motion. So 60 frames per second is pretty stock standard. You don't have to go out there shooting in 4K. 4K is literally unnecessary, but 60 frames per second is at 1080p is quite basic stock standard to do that. So yeah, at the end of every shoot, or even before you shoot, make sure your gear is cleaned. Make sure you clean off your lenses, because the last thing you want to do is shoot a whole video and your lens is dirty. I've done that and it just looks very, very, very irresponsible. So make sure your gear is cleaned. Make sure it's charged, packed away after every shoot, because this stuff is expensive. You can't afford to be breaking it, so it can be very expensive, and you don't want to like cheapen out on the gear because it's going to break, whatever. No, you just want to get some stuff that are industry standard, that will help your work be its best. All right, moving on to point number 3, in the field. In the field. Let's go. So when you're filming, keep in mind the story you want to tell. I know we've covered this basically in photography, but the same principles apply. Take a book with you, get a shot list. That way, when you're getting your B-roll for your shots, you know that it will help amplify that story instead of it being something random like a leaf on the ground. You need to get make sure your B-roll and the story that you're trying to tell with your pieces to cameras and your what have you match up, and they go with the flow. Excuse me. So like you just need a shot list to get those just shots that you definitely need to make this video work. I've said B-roll. You might be like, what's B-roll? B-roll this, B-roll that. No one fully explained to me when I was first starting out what B-roll was. I had to fully submerge and learn off YouTube what B-roll was and get it. Basically, B-roll is all the overlay, all the footage that you see. Like, let's say if I was talking to you and then I had some overlay footage of me in the field shooting. That's what we call B-roll. It's also used to cover up edits. So let's say if you had to cut this down, or you didn't want him to say, like yourself, to say that at that particular point you wanted to move it over here. So B-roll helps you to overlay to cover up those edits that you've made, essentially, but they also help tell the story of what the subject's actually saying. So B-roll is really important. Sometimes you can do the opposite, where you can just shoot something just with the audio extremely for B-roll. So this is really great if you have someone giving a prophetic word, and then you shoot it on your phone. I do this all the time because no one wants to whip out a voice recorder. You shoot it on your phone, but then you'll find some B-roll that you've got dug around in your phone, like that you have on your phone, to make that a video, or make that piece in a video quite interesting. You can also, if you're really like stretched for B-roll, you can use a photo every once in a while. When I did the Paston Wayman tribute, that's what I did. I used a prophetic word, and I used a photo, a high definition image that I actually screenshotted off the internet, and I used that as our intro. And you can check that out on our the Post House Salisbury's Instagram page. Also, like, you just have to, going back to in the field, when you are shooting and everything, you have to think about the different shots you're going to get. So any decent 30 second video, any decent 30-second video on Instagram requires at the bare minimum 15 different shots, and that's to make it decent, to make it engaging, so you're not having you're not looking at the same person or the same kind of thing for 5 seconds at a time. 5 seconds is way too long. A stage 5 seconds is like a really long time. So you have to change it up, because people usually only have an engagement time of 8 seconds. These days it's getting shorter and shorter. So you want to make sure that if you have a video, it's got the music, it's got the shots to match, it's got, you know, different shots. So you have to like be on it. You have to flip it up, different scene. You can't afford to have us looking at the same thing all the time. Unless otherwise it changes into a video like this, where I'm teaching you how to take photography, take photos and do videography, and it can be very quite uninteresting. But the reason why you're watching this is because you're invested in learning. And so when you're doing things for videos for Instagram, it's more based on the basis of entertainment, and the basis of getting people's interest and capturing their attention. So you want to make it as different and dynamic as possible. So also in videography, you can't be still as a statue. You just can't be like, okay, I'm getting it. Move. For heaven's sakes, just move. If you're in a concert scene, if everyone's jumping, you're jumping too, because you want people to feel like not only that they're missing out, but this was like the place that it was happening. If people are praying at the altar, you know, get low and get into your, like, the low space. Instead of just capturing it from the top, get low, get in there with them. Be with where the people are. If your subject's kind of like, wee and wee and wee. Sometimes you might have to move. If you have it in a gimbal, you can move slightly as well. It's a really great tactic just to keep people engaged and be like, oh wow. And I'm not saying that you should like make it obvious, but just slight, like, okay, they're moving this way, so you're like, I can do that. Like, you know, just make it interesting. Just make it more than just, you know, because it's more than just whacking something on a tripod and calling and hitting record and calling it a day. You have to make sure that your videos are engaging far more beyond than what you can do in, like, you know, any video editing app. You have to, like, from the get-go, as soon as you turn it on, you are there to create. So our job as creators is to be as creative as we can to get the best story out. So you can't afford just to be Bob standard. You have to think beyond that. You have to think outside the box. So yeah, that's basically like, once again, with the angles, get low, get high, get there. Like, this is what makes good visuals. Yeah, so move slightly, hold the camera, and like let the gimbal do what it does as a stabilizer. As you're moving, it stabilizes it, so it won't be all shonky. It'll be stabled. All right, point number 4, editing. All right, similar to photography, I use my editing apps that I do use. I pay for mine, so this is what the professionals use. You can ask your pastor or whatever to, you know, get a budget, but at the end of the day, if you want to get decent stuff, you're going to have to put some money and some decent coin behind the programs and software you do use. So create a folder on your hard drive when you're like, you finished, like, you know, video and everything. Create a folder on your hard drive, name and date it, and then, because if I'm shooting on an iPhone, I create with my MacBook Pro. I'm an Apple person. I'm not. Windows was not created for creatives. It was created for, you know, other stuff, but it wasn't for this. So a lot of Windows computers will struggle to keep up. But Apple is particularly built for people who do videos, who people do photographs. So just all of my stuff, all my my stuff is always in reference to Mac. So just keep it Mac or take it back. All right. So when you're editing, create a folder with your name, date, and date it, whatever. And then what I do is, instead of hooking my iPhone up, because I'm using my iPhone, I know some of you might use like an actual DSLR. Good for you. I have never really shot in DSLR because, like I said, I'm still coming into this. And so I'm trying to use the best tools that I do have, which is my iPhone, and I find I'm best learning off that. So I just airdrop it all to my computer or my the file that's in my hard drive, and then I create that folder. Awesome. And then I export that folder to Adobe Premiere Pro, and I drag and drop it in there and make a new project. And yeah, so that has all of my B-roll. It has all of my pieces to cameras. Sometimes I even do separate my piece to cameras and my B-roll. That way we can start building a story, then pop in your B-roll later. All right, so once you're in Premiere Pro, create a timeline / sequence, depending on what you call it, that closely matches the settings you shot with. So if you shot at 1080p with a 60 frames per second rate, when you're creating a new sequence or a new timeline, you can set it up like that. And I usually choose DSLR 1080p 60 frames per second. Name that sequence or timeline, because that's the name of what you're going to call the video. Like, let's say concert, you know, Lismore Impact Team or whatever. Name it, and it will come up with a new timeline, and then you can drag and drop your photos on there or videos on there. If you don't want to do all of that, if you're happy with the settings and everything like that, you don't want to tweak them or whatever, you can just drag and drop your video onto the section where it says timeline or sequence, and it will just automatically generate one from the settings that of your camera. Sometimes the reason why we do that is because different cameras use different settings, and if you want to match them up, sometimes they can be mismatched. But 9 times out of 10, if you drag and drop it, you should be all right. So separate your pieces of footage. So like I said, your B-roll from your pieces to camera. And then start building a timeline from there. Start editing down your piece to cameras to build the storyline, and then place in your B-roll. Now with your B-roll, it emphasizes the story. It is the color to the black and white. So you need to make sure that it matches, it syncs, if, getting all those angles and stuff to what is correlating with what the subject or what is being said. And sometimes videos, let's say it's a promo video is all B-roll, a lot of, like 9 times out of 10. There's rarely someone doing a piece to camera. So you don't really have to worry about piece to camera audio, like dialogue audio, but you just have to be aware that the B-roll has to match, especially with the music. So once you've edited your main piece of footage and B-roll to cover the edits and what have you, start working on what we call sound design. Sound design is really important because it builds up. Like I said with the example of Jaws at the beginning, it really builds up the whole dynamic of what the video is about. It makes the video. Video is made and it makes and breaks the video. So you can make it or you can break it with the audio you choose. So if you're promoting a concert, you wouldn't put like a classic, revival in my soul as a background music. You need to make sure that it's matching and get that, Social Club Misfits on there, get that, or if it's like an acoustic night, get that, Maverick City music on there and stuff like that. Just make sure the vibe matches what's visual. Because people aren't interested in boring. Because if you present a half-baked effort, people can see that. So make sure your effort's always 110%. It doesn't mean that you have to be uploading on social media every single day to stay relevant. It just means that what you do upload is always can be counted on to be quality. Okay, all right. Once you're satisfied with your editing, your music, so with your music, make sure it's level, nothing is peaking. There's no popping P's and you can't hear it. It's not muffled like this and all that. It sounds disgusting. But make sure it's clear, make sure it's audible, and make sure there's no echoes, like how my room kind of echoes right now. Make sure it's all nice and neat. And your music fades in and out. It's not dominating. It's all level. It's all in there. So once you're satisfied, it's all good. Make sure you export it. Now, depending on where you're exporting, it will depend on your export settings. I would prefer if you went to YouTube, seeing what the best export setting is the fastest as well, is for each kind of video making, and just go with that. With Instagram and IGTV, if vertical works best for you guys, make sure you use vertical. If horizontal works best, use horizontal. These days it's not that big of a deal because Instagram automatically changes it to vertical or horizontal, and you do have options, but just make sure that it's decent. I wouldn't shoot, just as a professional or seeing how the professionals do it, I don't shoot in vertical as much. Actually, these days I do more so now, just because it's like a real easy thing that people do these days. But before, it's just you shoot horizontal. So I do strongly believe, just because people have televisions and it's horizontal, people like to watch things horizontally on Netflix or whatever, or on their laptops. So just shoot horizontal as much as you can. But I get it, if you do have to shoot vertically, you can. These days, people are very quite accommodating. If not, they expect it. But if you can shoot horizontally, it's just best. It looks better. As well as the fact that you can always make a horizontal video, a vertical video with some decent cropping. Okay. So here are my final thoughts. We're wrapping this up. My final thoughts are doing what I've just kind of try to bring to you in less than hopefully an hour. It takes practice, it takes effort, it takes patience, and it takes money. You guys, it's an investment, whether it is investing $150 into a gimbal, like I did, buying something off Gumtree that works. These aren't that expensive. I think I paid a total of $200 for a wireless microphone. Now, 3 years ago, this would have been $400 at a minimum for like a nice Sony one that with a little antenna thing, with a pack. Easy, $400. But now, like, just because everyone is on social media, like, they can't afford to be that exclusive. So Rode, an Australian brand, you can trust its quality. You can call up tech support. I just accidentally turned it on. And you call up tech support if you need help. They're a trusted brand worldwide. So they're really good. They can be trusted. People who are in the audio industry do recommend Rode and Shure. So Rode, brilliant. So just know your stuff. Practice. Do not give up. You guys aren't going to be Peter McKinnon straight out of the bat. You're going to be yourselves, and you're going to have to learn how to develop your style. But you can learn from the likes of Peter McKinnon, Chris Howe, all these amazing people who have taught themselves, and they're teaching us every day to be better creatives. Like, this is a ministry. This is a tool that God is really using, especially in these last days, to bring about revival, to bring about people to church. Because people do come to church based on what they see. When they see you out the streets, they're saying, oh, you're from the Potter's House, XYZ. Okay, let's look you up on Instagram. If your Instagram is shoddy, they're just going to be like, oh, there might be a little crummy little church, whatever. You can be the littest church, but you have to know how to present yourself and platform who you are. And one of the ways you best do it is just to execute very well in the tools and the ministry you have. And with photography, it's no different. You have to continue on like going and growing. You can't just forsake it just because it got a little bit hard or it's a little bit wearisome. You have to endure. This honestly has been an absolute gift that literally has brought me face to face. Even when I was still crappy, it's brought me face to face with people. I've been nervous as all heck. I've interviewed the likes of Billy Graham face to face, got some amazing photos. I was shaking, guys. And so I was like, oh, my photos are going to suck, blah, 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 blah. But the part of being a photographer and knowing your craft is that you know it. They don't. You're the expert. They aren't. So own that and just be confident in that. Obviously, like, don't be arrogant, because no one likes an arrogant person. But just know that you're doing the best you can in that moment, and you're going to deliver the best you can. So don't be intimidated by who's in front of your camera as well. And saying that, whether it be Billy Graham, Roger Federer, or like, you know, like, for instance, me and the Prime Minister, I was really scared, and I was taking a selfie, and I was like, oh my gosh. But just be confident in who you are as a person and the God-given abilities, and don't ever be like, you can be nervous, but don't let it get a hold of you. And if you are nervous, that's what gimbals and a fast shutter speed are for, so you can still get your sharp looking images, okay? I pursued photography for 10 years, almost 10 years, and I'm still growing. I'm so passionate about it. I still get goosebumps when I see an image that just triggers, I don't know, like a whirlwind of emotions. And you, being a photographer and a videographer, you obviously see the creative design of our Lord. He has created us so uniquely, from the way someone talks to the way they crinkle their eyes when they smile or laugh, or the way, you know, just like their hands rest within each other. You get to observe that nice and close and use those little elements of who people are and who we are to tell the story that's in front of you. So my goodness, it's the biggest gift, and it's up to us to steward it well. Like, there's also a massive adrenaline rush when it comes to creating, and it's something that you can't get from anything. Like, I guess that's why surgeons also feel like gods and what have you. But when you're a Christian and you're doing this as a ministry, as something unto God, it comes with such great humility that God's entrusted you to share such a unique stories. So just know that what you're doing is serving a purpose that goes beyond you. And saying that, it's never, with all these ministries that we're given, it's never, ever, ever going to be about us, especially as photographers, as videographers. You're just going to have to accept that you're never really going to be in any of the photos. You're never really going to be in the end of year video. So that's life. Get over it. It's never about us, but it's always about the message of Jesus Christ and the people that are yet to know that message. So when we leave our ego, our pride at the door, that's when God's like, okay, this ministry can have anointing, it can move. I've been in places where my ego's just been and yeah, and then God's humbled me, you know, lens drops, you know, camera's not working, I forgot to put a memory card. Humility. You learn so much from those moments. But I was taught this from a photojournalist over in the United States, and like, they're crazy about church, but pray before every shoot. Just pray. It can be like, I've done this a billion times. Pray, you know, because there's always going to be those surprise shots you get that just were like, oh, hot damn, you know, like, just pray for God to use your eyes to capture something very unique, and just be surprised by God. Be open to God's presence, direction. I've had the Holy Spirit tell me to stop. I stopped. I've had the Holy Spirit tell me to turn around, to look up, and I've got some shots that I would have never thought I've gotten. And thanks be to God, it's because you have to step into this with humility. That being said, guys, just keep on learning. Don't ever stop. And technology and style in this creative industry always is changing. So always be on the money. Know when to switch up your style. But I hope you guys continue with this. It's been my pleasure. I was so excited when Pastor Evangelist Reddy told me to say, hey, Janelle, can you put this together? I was really excited. And I want to say thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity to teach you guys. Protect yourself. Please protect your eyes. Wear sunglasses when you're outside. And go outside. Just stay away from computers, you know, for as long as you can until it's necessary to get back in the game. But thank you so much. God bless you all, and all the best.